The morning sun cast long shadows across the Galactic Education Center on Kepler 442b, as Commander Sarah Chen walked through the main entrance for the first time as a civilian. Her military boots clicked against the polished floor, each step echoing in the vast atrium filled with students from dozens of different species. The weight of her old combat gear was gone, replaced by a simple teaching tablet and a worn leather bag containing lesson plans she'd spent weeks preparing. Sarah had commanded the 7th Human Fleet during the Zephyrian War, leading humanity's forces to victory against an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries. Now, at 35, she was starting over as a xenobiology instructor at the most prestigious interspecies academy in known space. The transition felt surreal. A tall, blue-skinned Altarian student bumped into her, his forearms carrying an impossible stack of textbooks. "Sorry, Professor," he mumbled, his translator device crackling slightly. Sarah caught one of the falling books, a heavy tome on comparative anatomy. "No problem," she replied, helping him restack the books. "You might want to use an anti-grav carrier for those." The student's large eyes widened when he recognized her face. "You're Commander Chen. Professor Chen now. I studied your tactics in my military history class. The Battle of Proxima was brilliant." Sarah smiled, though something tight formed in her chest. "That's behind me now. What's your name?" "Kethvar, ma'am. I'm in your xenobiology class this semester." "Well, Kethvar, I hope you're ready to learn about life forms instead of how to fight them." As Kethvar hurried away, Sarah made her way to the faculty wing. The corridors here were quieter, lined with offices belonging to professors who had never fired a weapon in anger or watched friends die in the void of space. She found her office, a small space with a window overlooking the Academy's famous botanical gardens, where plants from 100 worlds grew together in impossible harmony. Dr. Melvin, the reptilian saurian who served as department head, was waiting for her. His scales shifted from green to a welcoming blue as she entered. "Professor Chen, welcome to our humble academic battlefield," he said, his forked tongue flickering with what she'd learned was amusement. "I trust you'll find teaching less challenging than warfare." Sarah set down her bag and looked around the sparse office. "Different kind of challenge, I suppose." "Indeed. Your first class begins in an hour. Basic xenobiology. 43 students representing 12 species. Some are quite spirited." "I've dealt with spirited before." Dr. Melvin's scales shifted to a cautious yellow. "Perhaps, but these young beings test boundaries in ways that might surprise even a veteran commander. Academic freedom encourages questioning authority in ways military discipline does not." After Melvin left, Sarah arranged her few personal items on the desk. A photo of her old crew, a commendation crystal from the Galactic Council, and a small potted earth plant her sister had sent as a good luck gift. She stared at the photo for a long moment, remembering faces that would never age beyond their final battle. The classroom was already buzzing with conversation when she arrived. Students clustered in species groups, the universal tendency toward familiar company overriding the Academy's integration efforts. She recognized several species she'd fought alongside during the war, and a few she'd fought against. A young Zephyrian female sat alone in the back corner, her iridescent wings folded tightly against her insectoid frame. Sarah felt her jaw tighten involuntarily. The war had ended 2 years ago, but seeing one of the enemy species still triggered old reflexes. "Good morning," Sarah began, her voice carrying the authority that had once commanded fleets. The chatter died instantly. "I'm Professor Chen, and this is Introduction to Xenobiology. Before we begin, I want to establish some ground rules." A confident-looking human student raised his hand. "Professor, is it true you personally killed over 1,000 Zephyrians during the war?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a plasma blast. Sarah saw the Zephyrian student's antennae droop, and several other students turned to stare at the girl. The classroom fell silent enough to hear the environmental systems humming. "That question is inappropriate and irrelevant to our study of biological systems," Sarah replied evenly. "This classroom is neutral ground. We're here to learn about life, not death," the human student persisted. "But I'm famous for ending a war," Sarah cut him off. "Now I'm here to teach you about the incredible diversity of life in our galaxy. If you're more interested in military history than biology, you're in the wrong class." A crystalline student, her silicon-based form refracting light in complex patterns, raised what might have been a hand. "Professor, how does your military experience help us understand xenobiology?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "War teaches you to observe differences quickly and accurately. In combat, recognizing whether something is friend, foe, or neutral can mean the difference between life and death. Those same observation skills apply to biological study, the ability to notice subtle variations in behavior, physiology, or biochemistry." She moved to the holographic display and activated a three-dimensional model of a Terran rainforest ecosystem. But where war focuses on exploiting differences, science celebrates them. Every species in this display evolved unique solutions to survive and thrive. Our job is to understand and appreciate that diversity. The Zephyrian student finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if some students make others feel unwelcome?" Sarah met her compound eyes directly. "Then those students will learn that in my classroom, respect is not optional. We're all here to learn from each other." For the next hour, Sarah guided the class through basic principles of comparative biology. She found herself drawing on experiences from dozens of worlds, describing bioluminescent cave systems she'd hidden in during the siege of Vega 3, or the symbiotic relationships she'd observed between different species in refugee camps. As students filed out after class, the Zephyrian girl approached hesitantly. "Professor Chen, I'm Zakth. I wanted to thank you for what you said." "You don't need to thank me for basic courtesy, Zakth, but I do want you to know that your presence here matters. Your species has a unique perspective on collective consciousness and hive mind biology that could benefit everyone." Zakth's wings fluttered slightly, a sign of surprise. "You studied our biology?" "Know your enemy" was a military principle. "Know your students" is an academic one. As the classroom emptied, Sarah realized that teaching might present challenges she'd never faced in combat. In war, the enemy was clear and the objective simple. Here, in this room filled with young minds from across the galaxy, she was building something instead of destroying it, and that, she thought, might be the hardest mission she'd ever accepted. 3 weeks into the semester, Sarah discovered that teenage beings from any species shared certain universal traits. They tested boundaries, formed cliques, and had an uncanny ability to find trouble. Her xenobiology classes had settled into a routine, but maintaining order among 43 students from 12 different species proved more challenging than coordinating a fleet. Battle the morning started with what she'd come to recognize as typical classroom chaos. The Altarian students had apparently challenged the Centaurian delegation to a contest of strength, resulting in 2 broken desks and a dented holographic projector. Meanwhile, the human students were placing bets on the outcome, and the crystalline beings were analyzing the structural failures with scientific fascination. "Enough," Sarah's voice cut through the noise like a plasma beam. The room fell silent. "Kethvar Thanecore, my office after class. Everyone else seats." She activated the day's lesson on adaptation mechanisms, but her attention kept drifting to Zakth, who sat alone as usual. The young Zephyrian had proven to be one of her brightest students, offering insights into collective biology that amazed even Sarah. Yet the other students still maintained their distance. "Old prejudices dying hard. Can anyone explain why the Andromedan slime molds developed such complex chemical communication systems?" Sarah asked. Zakth's hand shot up immediately, then slowly lowered as she noticed the other students' reactions. A few human students exchanged glances that made Sarah's jaw tighten. "Go ahead." "Zakth," Sarah encouraged. "Well, they live in environments with limited physical contact, so chemical signals allow them to coordinate behavior across vast distances. It's similar to how my people use pheromones for complex social organization." Marcus, the human student who'd challenged Sarah on the first day, snorted. "Right. Like we should trust anything about Zephyrian organization after they tried to enslave half the galaxy." The classroom temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Zakth's wings folded tighter against her body, and Sarah felt the familiar surge of command authority rising in her chest. "Marcus Thompson," she said, her voice carrying the same tone she'd once used to discipline insubordinate officers. Outside, now. The young man's face flushed red. "I was just stating facts, Professor. My uncle died fighting her people," I said outside. After Marcus reluctantly left, Sarah addressed the remaining students. "I'm going to say this once, and I want everyone to understand clearly. This classroom operates under one rule: respect for all sentient life. I don't care what happened during the war. I don't care about your species' historical conflicts. In here we are scholars first, species second. She gestured toward Zakth. This student has consistently demonstrated superior understanding of biological systems. Her insights have enhanced every discussion. If you're too prejudiced to learn from her, you're limiting your own education. A Vorthon student, his crystalline form shifting to deep blue, spoke up. Professor, it's difficult to forget. My homeworld still bears the scars of Zephyrian bioweapons. I understand, Sarah replied, her tone softening slightly. I have my own memories of the war. But look around this room. We have former enemies sitting together, learning together. That's not weakness, that's evolution. She spent the rest of the class period discussing symbiotic relationships, drawing parallels between biological cooperation and social cooperation. When the session ended, she asked Zakth to stay behind. How are you holding up? Sarah asked once they were alone. Zakth's antennae drooped. I knew it would be difficult. My family thought I was crazy for coming here. Most Zephyrians believe integration with other species is impossible. What do you believe? I believe that understanding each other is the only way forward. But sometimes I wonder if I'm naive. Sarah moved to the window overlooking the botanical gardens. You know what I learned as a military commander? The biggest victories come from changing people's minds, not just defeating their armies. What you're doing here, proving that a Zephyrian can contribute to galactic knowledge, that's a victory worth fighting for. Later that afternoon, Sarah found Marcus in the Academy's recreation center, aggressively attacking a holographic combat simulation. She watched him dispatch virtual enemies with impressive skill before approaching. Good reflexes, she commented. He paused the simulation, breathing hard. My uncle taught me. Said if the war ever started again, I'd need to be ready. The war is over, Marcus, is it? They're still out there, still breeding, still expanding. How do we know they won't try again? Sarah recognized the anger in his voice because she'd felt it herself. Because young Zephyrians like Zakth are choosing cooperation over conquest. Because instead of plotting revenge, they're studying biology and contributing to scientific knowledge. One student doesn't represent an entire species. No, but she represents possibility. And possibility is how change begins. Marcus's shoulders sagged. It's hard to let go of the anger, Professor. When I look at her, I see the things that killed my uncle. I understand. But when I look at her, I see a brilliant young scientist who chose to leave her homeworld to study with former enemies. That takes more courage than firing a weapon. The next day brought a new challenge. Sarah arrived at her classroom to find it in complete chaos. Food, if the various biochemical substances could be called food, was splattered across the walls. Students from different species were squared off in opposing groups, and the air hummed with tension. At the center of it all stood Zakth, her usually neat appearance disheveled, facing off against Marcus and two other human students. What is going on here? Sarah's voice cut through the noise like a command beacon. She attacked us, Marcus shouted, pointing at Zakth. She sprayed some kind of chemical weapon. It wasn't a weapon. Zakth protested, her translator crackling with emotional overload. It was a defensive pheromone. They cornered me! Sarah surveyed the scene with tactical precision. The splattered substances were clearly food items from different species' lunch containers. The positioning of the students suggested Zakth had indeed been cornered near the back of the classroom. And the chemical smell in the air was consistent with Zephyrian stress pheromones, not attack compounds. Everyone sit down, she ordered. Now. The students reluctantly took their seats, though the tension remained thick enough to cut with a vibroblade. Zakth, explain what happened. The young Zephyrian's voice shook as she recounted being confronted by the human students about her people's wartime activities. They demanded she defend her species' actions, growing increasingly aggressive when she tried to leave. I only released stress pheromones when they blocked my exit, she finished. It's an involuntary response when my people feel trapped. Sarah turned to Marcus. And your version? We just wanted answers. Her people nearly destroyed everything we care about, and she acts like it never happened. So you cornered her in my classroom to interrogate her about a war she was too young to participate in? The room fell silent. Sarah could see the recognition dawning on several faces as her words sank in. Zakth, how old are you? 17 standard years, Professor. Sarah let that hang in the air for a moment. The war ended 2 years ago. It lasted 4 years. How old would she have been when it started? Marcus's face went pale as he did the math. 11. A child, Sarah emphasized. You've been holding a child responsible for the actions of adults she had no control over. She moved to the center of the classroom, addressing all the students. This is exactly why we study biology instead of just military history. When you understand how different species think, communicate, and respond to stress, you avoid incidents like this. The rest of the period was spent discussing Zephyrian biology, stress responses, and pheromone communication. By the end, even Marcus seemed genuinely interested in learning, rather than confronting. As students filed out, Sarah noticed several of them, including 2 humans, stopping to apologize to Zakth. It was a small step, but in her experience, small steps often led to great journeys. That evening, Sarah sat in her office grading papers when she heard a soft knock. Zakth entered carrying a small potted plant with unusual silver leaves. I wanted to thank you, the young Zephyrian said, and to give you this. It's a memory flower from my homeworld. When it blooms, it releases compounds that help preserve important memories. Sarah accepted the plant carefully. What memory do you want me to preserve? Today. The day someone finally listened to who I am instead of what species I belong to. As Zakth left, Sarah realized that her mission was already succeeding in ways she hadn't expected. She wasn't just teaching biology. She was helping to build the foundation for a galaxy where former enemies could become friends, where understanding could replace fear, and where the next generation might avoid the mistakes of the past. The memory flower's silver leaves caught the light from her desk lamp, and Sarah smiled. Some victories, she thought, were worth more than any military campaign. The crisis began on a Tuesday morning when Dr. Melvin burst into Sarah's office, his scales cycling rapidly through colors she'd never seen before, a clear sign of extreme agitation among his species. Professor Chen, we have a serious problem, he announced, his forked tongue flickering nervously. The Galactic Education Board is conducting an emergency review of our interspecies program. Sarah looked up from her lesson plans. What kind of review? The kind that could shut us down permanently. Melvin's scales shifted to a deep red. Apparently, several incidents across the galaxy have raised questions about the wisdom of mixing former enemy species in academic settings. Sarah's blood chilled. What incidents? A bombing at the university on Tau Ceti, a student riot on Vega Prime, 3 deaths in a laboratory accident that some are calling sabotage. Melvin sat heavily in the chair across from her desk. The board is sending an inspection team here next week. If they find any evidence of interspecies conflict or potential security risks, they'll recommend closing the integration program. That would be a disaster, Sarah said, thinking immediately of students like Zakth who had risked everything to be here. Indeed, which is why I need your help. The inspection team will focus heavily on your classes since you have the highest concentration of former enemy species. Melvin's scales brightened slightly. They're also sending Admiral Reeves to oversee the military assessment. Sarah's stomach dropped. Admiral James Reeves had been her commanding officer during the war, a man who believed the only good enemy was a dead enemy. He'd opposed the peace treaties and made no secret of his belief that integration was a dangerous fantasy. Wonderful, she muttered. There's more. The inspection happens to coincide with your advanced xenobiology field trip to the Forbidden Zones. The board specifically wants to observe how mixed species teams handle high-stress situations in dangerous environments. The Forbidden Zones were areas of the planet where various terraforming experiments had gone wrong, creating bizarre ecosystems that served as perfect natural laboratories. They were also genuinely dangerous, requiring students to work together for survival. That afternoon, Sarah called a special meeting with her advanced xenobiology class. 26 students representing 9 species filled the smaller conference room, including Zakth, Marcus, Kethvar, and several others who had become the unofficial leaders of their respective groups. I'm going to be direct with you, Sarah began. The Academy is under review. There are people in the galaxy who believe different species can't work together peacefully. Next week, we're going to prove them wrong. She explained the field trip and the inspection, watching as the student's expression shifted from curiosity to understanding to determination. Professor? Asked Lyra, a Centaurian student whose blue skin showed stress patterns around her gills. What happens if we fail this evaluation? The integration program gets shut down, Sarah replied honestly. Students like Zakth get sent back to their homeworlds. The Academy returns to single-species education, and the galaxy takes a step backward. Marcus raised his hand. What do you need us to do? Sarah felt a surge of pride at the question. 3 months ago, this same student had been confronting Zaketh with accusations. Now he was asking how to help protect her right to be here. Work together, support each other, show them that diversity isn't a weakness, it's a strength. Over the next week, Sarah watched her students prepare with intensity that reminded her of pre-battle briefings. They studied maps of the forbidden zones, reviewed emergency protocols, and most importantly, they trained together. Zaketh's knowledge of chemical analysis paired perfectly with the crystalline student's ability to process mineral compositions. The Altarian's strength complemented the human's technical skills. Marcus, who had shown leadership potential, naturally emerged as a coordinator between the different groups. The morning of the field trip dawned gray and overcast, matching Sarah's mood. The inspection team had arrived the previous evening. 3 stern-faced academics, 2 military observers, and Admiral Reeves himself, looking exactly as Sarah remembered, tall, silver-haired, and radiating disapproval. Commander Chen, he greeted her with the slightest nod. I hear you've been playing teacher. Professor Chen, she corrected gently. And yes, I've found education rewarding. His eyes swept over the assembled students, lingering on the Zephyrian and other former enemy species. Interesting experiment. I look forward to seeing how it performs under pressure. The transport vessels carried them to Research Station Alpha at the edge of Zone 7, where crystalline formations had created a maze of tunnels and caverns. The area was known for sudden environmental changes and unstable atmospheric conditions, perfect for testing biological adaptation theories and team cohesion. Dr. Harwick, the lead academic inspector, addressed the students before departure. You'll be working in mixed species teams of 4. Each team will collect samples from different areas of the zone and analyze them for adaptive characteristics. You have 6 hours. Sarah watched as her students naturally sorted themselves into balanced teams. To her surprise, Marcus immediately moved to Zaketh's side. Mind if I join your team? He asked. Zaketh's antennae perked up with what Sarah had learned with surprise. Are you certain? The other humans might not understand. Let them figure it out, Marcus replied. I've learned more working with you than I have with anyone else. They were joined by Kethvar and Nira, a young Vorthon whose crystalline structure could interface directly with the zone's mineral formations. Sarah felt a flicker of optimism as she watched the team dynamics. The first few hours went smoothly. The students collected samples, shared equipment, and adapted to the zone's challenges with impressive cooperation. Sarah and the inspection team followed at a distance, monitoring through communication devices and observing through long-range scopes. Then everything went wrong. A seismic shift, common in the crystalline zones, caused a section of tunnel to collapse, separating Marcus and Zaketh's team from the main group. Worse, the atmospheric sensors indicated a dangerous buildup of toxic gases in their sealed section. Emergency protocols, Admiral Reeves barked. Evacuate the zone. Wait, Sarah said, studying the readings. They have emergency oxygen for 4 hours. Let's see how they handle this. You want to use students as test subjects? Dr. Harwick demanded. I want to show you what they're capable of. Through the communication links, they could hear the trapped team assessing their situation with remarkable calm. Marcus had taken charge of coordination. Zaketh was analyzing the gas composition. Kethvar was searching for structural weaknesses in the tunnel walls. And Nira was interfacing with the crystalline formations to map potential escape routes. The gas is primarily methane-based with trace organics, Zaketh reported. My people have natural resistance to this type of atmosphere. I can work longer in these conditions than the others. Nira's found a possible route through the crystal matrix, Kethvar added, but it's narrow. Zaketh's smaller frame gives her the best chance of reaching the surface and guiding rescue efforts. Sarah held her breath as she listened to Marcus make the critical decision. Zaketh, can you do it? Yes, but I'll need to use my natural pheromone production to mark the path for rescue teams. It means revealing capabilities we normally keep hidden. Do it, Admiral Reeves frowned. What's she talking about? Sarah explained about Zephyrian chemical trail marking abilities, watched his expression shift from suspicion to grudging interest as they tracked Zaketh's progress through the crystal maze. Her pheromone markers created a clear path for the rescue team, who reached the trapped students with 20 minutes of oxygen to spare. When the students emerged, dirty but triumphant, Admiral Reeves was waiting for them. That was impressive teamwork, he admitted grudgingly, then addressed Zakth directly. Your species' chemical abilities could be valuable in emergency situations. Zakth straightened, her wings catching the afternoon light. We prefer to use our abilities to help rather than harm, Admiral. That evening, the inspection team delivered their preliminary findings. Dr. Harwick stood before the assembled faculty and students, his expression unreadable. We came here expecting to find evidence that interspecies education was dangerous and impractical, he began. Instead, we found something unexpected. Sarah felt her heart pounding. We found that when different species work together, they don't just overcome their individual limitations, they create capabilities that exceed the sum of their parts. He looked directly at Sarah's students. Today's performance demonstrated problem-solving abilities, mutual support, and leadership qualities that surpass anything we've seen in single-species programs. Admiral Reeves stepped forward. The military assessment concurs. These students showed tactical thinking, adaptability under pressure, and unit cohesion that would be valuable in any organization. He paused, looking at Zakth, including military organizations that might benefit from diverse perspectives. The inspection team's final recommendation was unanimous. Not only should the integration program continue, but it should be expanded to other institutions across the galaxy. That night, Sarah found her students celebrating in the botanical gardens, species barriers completely forgotten as they shared food, stories, and laughter. Marcus and Zakth sat together, comparing notes on leadership techniques while other students discussed the day's discoveries. Professor Chen, Zakth called out when she spotted Sarah. Marcus has been telling me about human military leadership principles. They're surprisingly compatible with Zephyrian collective decision-making processes. Who knew? Sarah replied with a smile, that former enemies might actually complement each other. As she watched her students, her diverse, brilliant, impossible students, continue their celebration, Sarah realized she had accomplished something she'd never achieved as a military commander. She hadn't just won a battle, she'd helped build a foundation for lasting peace. The memory flower from Zakth bloomed that night, releasing its preservative compounds into her office air. Sarah breathed deeply, imprinting every detail of this moment, the moment when the future became a little brighter. 6 months after the successful inspection, Sarah faced her greatest challenge yet, the annual Galactic Science Fair. What should have been a celebration of student achievement had become a political minefield when the Zephyrian Empire announced they were sending a delegation to observe their students' progress. The news hit the academy like a plasma bombardment. Within hours, protests erupted on campus as anti-Zephyrian groups demanded the delegation be barred. Counter-protesters argued for peaceful engagement. The administration found itself caught between political pressure and educational principles. Sarah stood in her office, watching through the window as security forces struggled to maintain order between opposing groups of demonstrators. Her door chimed and Zakth entered, her usually vibrant wings dulled with stress. "Professor, maybe I should withdraw from the science fair," the young Zephyrian said quietly. "My presence is causing too much disruption." "Absolutely not," Sarah replied firmly. "Your project on cross-species symbiotic relationships could revolutionize how we understand biological cooperation. You're not withdrawing because some people can't see past old prejudices." Zakth's antennae drooped. "But the delegation? They're from the warrior caste. They don't believe in integration either. They think I'm betraying our species by studying here." Sarah turned from the window. "Then prove them wrong. Show them and everyone else what you've accomplished." The week leading up to the fair became increasingly tense. 3 more protest incidents erupted, including one where anti-integration activists attempted to damage Zakth's laboratory equipment. The attack was stopped by Marcus and several other human students who had formed an impromptu security detail around their Zephyrian classmate. "This is getting out of hand," Dr. Melvin confided to Sarah during an emergency faculty meeting. "The board is considering canceling the fair entirely." That would be exactly the wrong message, Sarah argued. We'd be telling everyone that fear wins over education. Admiral Reeves, who had remained at the academy as a military liaison, stood up. "Professor Chen is right. Canceling would validate every criticism of the integration program. We proceed as planned. The morning of the science fair dawned clear and bright, though the tension on campus was thick enough to cut with a vibroblade. Security was tight as delegates from dozens of worlds arrived to view student projects. The Zephyrian delegation was unmistakable. 6 tall figures in traditional warrior armor, their iridescent wings creating an impressive display as they moved through the exhibition halls. Sarah positioned herself strategically near Zakth's booth, which displayed her research on how different species' biological systems could work together to solve environmental problems. The project was brilliant, combining Terran botanical knowledge, Altarian chemical analysis, and Zephyrian collective biology principles. The symbiotic relationship between Terran mycorrhizal fungi and Altarian root systems increases nutrient absorption by 300%. Zakth explained to a group of visiting scientists. When we add Zephyrian biocoordination compounds, the efficiency increases to over 500%. Dr. Vexes-High, a renowned Centaurian biologist, nodded approvingly. Fascinating. Have you tested this in multiple soil types? Yes, sir. My team ran trials in 7 different planetary environments. Zakth gestured to her collaborators, Marcus, Kethvar, and 3 other students from different species. Each team member contributed expertise from their species' agricultural traditions. Sarah felt a swell of pride watching Zakth present her work with confidence and skill. The young Zephyrian had grown tremendously since that first nervous day in xenobiology class. The Zephyrian delegation approached the booth with military precision. Their leader, General Kethvar, was an imposing figure whose scarred wings spoke of countless battles. His compound eyes swept over the display with obvious skepticism. So, he said in accented standard, this is what becomes of our young when they abandon proper Zephyrian education. Zakth straightened, meeting his gaze directly. General, I haven't abandoned Zephyrian principles. I've expanded them. My research incorporates collective biology theories developed by our greatest scientists. To what end? To help alien species exploit our knowledge? To help all species thrive together. Zakth's voice grew stronger. The war ended because we realized that cooperation serves everyone better than conquest. General Kekthar's wings rustled with agitation. Cooperation is weakness. The Zephyrian way is dominance through superior biology. Marcus stepped forward and Sarah tensed, ready to intervene. But instead of confrontation, the young human's voice was respectful but firm. General, with respect, I've studied Zephyrian biology extensively. Your species' greatest achievement isn't dominance, it's collective problem-solving. Zakth's research applies that principle to interspecies challenges. And what would a human know of Zephyrian achievements? Kekthar demanded. I know that Zephyrian hive-mind coordination allowed your species to develop faster than light communication, Marcus replied. I know your bioengineering created sustainable ecosystems on dead worlds. I know that before the war, Zephyrian scientists were working on solutions to galactic climate problems. Kekthar's compound eyes focused on Marcus with new interest. You studied our pre-war science? Yes, sir. Professor Chen taught us that understanding biology means understanding all biological achievements, regardless of species origin. Sarah watched the general's posture shift slightly. The rigid military bearing remained, but something in his expression suggested he was reconsidering his assumptions. Show me this research, Kekthar commanded. For the next hour, Zakth and her team walked the Zephyrian delegation through their project. They demonstrated how Zephyrian biocoordination principles could enhance agricultural systems, improve environmental restoration, and create sustainable food production for multiple species. The applications are remarkable, admitted scientist Villana, a smaller Zephyrian whose wings showed the blue patterns of the scholar caste. This research could help restore damaged ecosystems throughout former war zones. General Kekthar remained silent, studying the data displays. Finally, he spoke. Your research suggests that Zephyrian biology has value beyond warfare. It always did, Zakth replied. The war made us forget that our greatest strength was never our ability to fight. It was our ability to work together toward common goals. And now you work together with former enemies toward those goals? Zakth gestured to her diverse team. Now I work with friends toward goals that benefit everyone. The tension in the exhibition hall was broken by an unexpected incident. A group of radical protesters had somehow bypassed security and burst into the science fair, shouting anti-integration slogans and heading directly for Zakth's booth. Zephyrian sympathizer. One shouted at Sarah, "Traitor to humanity." "Species purity," another yelled, advancing on Zakth with what appeared to be a chemical spray. The reaction was immediate and telling. Marcus threw himself between the attacker and Zakth. Kethvar and other students formed a protective circle. Even more surprisingly, General Kekthar and his delegation moved to shield the young Zephyrian. "Stand down." Kekthar's voice carried the authority of command. "This youngling is under our protection." Security forces arrived within moments, removing the protesters. But the damage was done, or rather, the healing was begun. Sarah watched as General Kekthar helped Zakth check her equipment for damage. "Are you harmed, youngling?" he asked, his tone gentler than before. "No, General. Thank you for protecting me." Kekthar's wings shifted to a pattern Sarah didn't recognize. Perhaps there is wisdom in learning from former enemies. Your research shows promise." "Does this mean the warrior caste might support integration programs?" Zakth asked hopefully. "It means," Kekthar said carefully, "that the warrior caste will recommend further study of your methods. If cooperation can achieve what conquest could not, then perhaps it deserves consideration." The science fair concluded with Zakth's team winning the grand prize for most innovative research. But more importantly, it ended with General Kekthar formally requesting that the Zephyrian Empire establish an exchange program with the Academy. That evening, Sarah found herself in the botanical gardens with her students and their various supporters, including several members of the Zephyrian delegation. General Kekthar sat somewhat awkwardly on a bench designed for humanoid anatomy, listening as Zakth explained Earth flowering cycles. Professor Chen, scientist Velana, approached with the fluid grace of her species. "I wanted to thank you for what you've accomplished here." "I just provided the classroom," Sarah replied. "The students did the real work." "No," Velana said. "You provided something more important. You provided hope. For the first time since the war ended, I believe our species might truly find peace." Marcus appeared at Sarah's elbow, carrying 2 cups of coffee and looking slightly stunned. "Professor, General Kekthar just offered me a position in the Zephyrian Research Corps after graduation. He said humans bring a useful perspective to biological research." Sarah smiled. "Are you interested?" "Are you kidding? 6 months ago I wanted to fight Zephyrians. Now I'm being recruited by them. This place changes everything." As Sarah looked around the gardens, watching former enemies share food and ideas under the light of alien stars, she realized that Marcus was right. The Academy didn't just educate students, it transformed them. And through them, it was slowly transforming the galaxy. The memory flower on her desk would bloom again tonight, preserving another moment when the impossible became inevitable, another step toward a future where diversity was celebrated, where former enemies became allies, and where the next generation would inherit a galaxy united in pursuit of knowledge, rather than divided by fear. The war might have made her a commander, but teaching had made her something more important, an architect of peace. The emergency alert reached Sarah at 03:47 hours, jolting her from sleep with the piercing tone she remembered from her military days. The message was brief but chilling. Multiple Academy students missing. Suspected kidnapping. Report to Crisis Command immediately. Sarah threw on clothes and raced across campus to the security center, where she found chaos. Dr. Melvin was coordinating with local authorities while Admiral Reeves studied tactical displays. The grim faces around the room told her everything she needed to know before anyone spoke. "How many?" she asked. 12 students, Admiral Reeves replied without looking up from his holographic display. All from different species, including 3 humans, 2 Zephyrians, an Altarian, a Centaurian, a Vorthan, and others. They were taken during an overnight camping expedition in the Northern Wilderness Preserve. Sarah's blood ran cold. "Which students?" Dr. Melvin's scales shifted to a distressed purple. "Zakth, Marcus, Kethvar, Lyra, essentially the leadership core of our integration program." "Terrorist group?" Sarah asked, though she already suspected the answer. "The Purity Coalition," Admiral Reeves confirmed. "They've claimed responsibility and made demands. They want all interspecies programs shut down, all non-human students expelled from human-dominated worlds, and a return to species-segregated education." Sarah studied the tactical display showing the vast wilderness area where the students had vanished. Thousands of square kilometers of dense forest, rocky canyons, and underground cave systems. Perfect terrain for hiding hostages and avoiding detection. What about rescue operations? Limited, Admiral Reeves admitted grimly. The terrorists have threatened to harm the hostages if any military or security forces enter the search area. They've demanded negotiations begin within 24 hours. And if we don't negotiate? The silence that followed was answer enough. Dr. Melvin approached Sarah with a data pad. There's something else. We've been monitoring communications and the students seem to be organized. Despite being captives, they're attempting to coordinate amongst themselves. Sarah reviewed the intercepted fragments of communication, brief bursts of coded language that would mean nothing to most listeners, but she recognized the patterns. The students were using biological terminology as a cipher, drawing on their shared classroom experiences to communicate without their captors' understanding. They're planning something, she realized. Admiral Reeves nodded. The question is whether we let them try or risk a military intervention that could get them all killed. There's a third option, Sarah said, an idea forming. What if we help them? Absolutely not, Reeves replied immediately. These are students, not soldiers. They're students who've been trained to work together, to understand each other's capabilities, and to solve problems under pressure. Sarah pointed to the communication intercepts. They're already organizing themselves. We just need to give them the tools to succeed. It's too dangerous. Admiral, these terrorists chose these specific students for a reason. They're the visible symbols of successful integration, but that same integration makes them uniquely capable of surviving and escaping. Dr. Melvin's scales brightened slightly. What do you propose? Sarah moved to the tactical display, highlighting terrain features. We can't send in rescue teams, but we can make sure the students have access to information and resources. Emergency supply drops disguised as standard wilderness maintenance. Communication relays that let them coordinate better, and we give them something their captors won't expect, which is a teacher who knows their capabilities better than anyone. Admiral Reeves stared at her. You want to go in there yourself? I want to provide battlefield intelligence to students who are perfectly capable of mounting their own rescue operation. Sarah's voice carried the authority of her command days. These kids have been training together for months. They know each other's strengths. They understand how to work as a team. And they're motivated to protect each other. The argument continued for another hour. But eventually, Sarah won authorization for a limited support mission. She would infiltrate the area with minimal equipment, establish communication with the students, and provide tactical guidance while they executed their own escape plan. 6 hours later, Sarah crouched in dense undergrowth 3 kilometers from the terrorist camp, listening to Zacht's barely audible transmission through a quantum communication device no larger than her thumbnail. Professor, is that really you? It's me, Zacht. How is everyone? Scared but unharmed. Marcus has kept us organized. Using the leadership principles from your class, we've been mapping the area and studying our captors' routines. Good. What have you learned? There are 15 terrorists working in shifts of 5. They're well-armed but not professionally trained. They've made several tactical errors that someone with military experience wouldn't make. Sarah smiled despite the circumstances. Her students were thinking like analysts, not panicking like victims. Kethvar has been using his people's strength to test the structural integrity of our prison. Zacht continued. The building is old human construction, not designed to hold Altarian strength levels. He thinks he can create an exit point. What about guards? Lyra's been monitoring their biological states through water vibrations. Her gills are incredibly sensitive. She can tell us when they're tired, alert, or distracted. And escape routes? That's where we need help. The area is too large and unfamiliar. We need guidance to avoid patrols and reach extraction points. Over the next several hours, Sarah provided tactical intelligence while the students refined their escape plan. It was unlike any military operation she'd ever supported. Instead of soldiers with specialized training, she was guiding a diverse group of teenagers whose greatest weapons were their scientific knowledge and mutual trust. The plan they developed was elegantly simple. Kethvar would create an exit point during the terrorists' shift change when attention was focused elsewhere. Zacht would use her species' natural pheromone production to lay scent trails that would confuse tracking efforts. The Vorthon student, Nira, would interface with local mineral formations to create minor seismic disturbances that would mask the sound of their escape. Most importantly, They would move as a single unit, using each species' abilities to compensate for others' limitations. The humans would provide tactical coordination. The Altarians would handle heavy lifting. The Centaurians would navigate using their natural directional senses. And the Zephyrians would scout ahead using their superior aerial mobility. "Professor," Marcus's voice came through the communication link as evening approached. "Are you certain this will work?" "I'm certain you have the skills to make it work," Sarah replied. "You've all proven that you can overcome challenges by working together. This is just another challenge. A challenge where failure means we might not survive. Marcus, I've seen professional military units with less cohesion and adaptability than your group. Trust your training, trust each other, and trust yourself." At precisely 23:47 hours, the escape began. Sarah watched through night vision equipment as Keith Var quietly dismantled a section of wall with his bare hands, his Altarian strength making quick work of the old construction. Zaketh emerged first, her wings folded tight as she moved through the darkness laying chemical markers. The 12 students moved like a single organism, each individual playing their role in a complex biological system. When terrorist patrols approached, they dispersed according to plan, some students hiding in predetermined locations while others created diversions. The most critical moment came when they encountered an unexpected patrol in a narrow canyon. Trapped between armed terrorists and a sheer cliff face, the students faced their greatest test. "Professor, we need options," Marcus whispered urgently. Sarah studied her tactical display, then made a decision that went against every military protocol she'd ever learned. "Trust Zakth, let her lead, ma'am. Zephyrian aerial reconnaissance abilities. She can see options you can't." Through the communication link, Sarah heard Zakth take charge with confidence that reminded her of seasoned combat officers. "Nira, can you interface with the cliff minerals? We need handholds." "Kethvar, anchor points for the others." "Lyra, monitor the water flow. There should be a stream at the bottom that will mask our scent trail." Within minutes, the students had turned an impossible situation into a controlled descent. They moved down the cliff face like a precision team, each species' abilities complementing the others in ways that would have been impossible in single-species groups. By dawn, all 12 students had reached the extraction point Sarah had designated, a clearing where Academy security could safely retrieve them. As she watched the rescue vehicles arrive, Sarah felt a pride deeper than any military victory. "Professor," Zakth's voice came through the communication link one final time. "Thank you for believing in us. Thank you for proving that belief was justified." The aftermath of the rescue made galactic news. The successful escape had been accomplished without weapons, without violence, and without a single injury to any student. The terrorists, frustrated by their escaped hostages and facing overwhelming evidence of public support for the integration program, surrendered to authorities. More importantly, the incident demonstrated something that no amount of academic success could have shown. When faced with real danger, students from former enemy species had protected each other, trusted each other, and succeeded together. The Galactic Education Board's response was swift and decisive. Integration programs would not only continue but would be expanded and accelerated. The model pioneered at the Academy would become the standard for interspecies education throughout known space. That evening, Sarah stood in her office looking out at the botanical gardens where her students, her incredible, courageous students, were celebrating their safe return. They sat together in mixed species groups sharing food and stories, their bonds forged stronger by the trial they'd endured together. The memory flower bloomed again, its silver petals releasing preservative compounds into the air. As Sarah breathed deeply, she realized that this moment represented more than just a successful rescue. It was proof that the future she'd been building in her classroom wasn't just an idealistic dream. It was the new reality, built one student relationship at a time, tested under fire, and proven unbreakable by those who would divide them. The next generation wouldn't just inherit a galaxy at peace, they were actively creating it. 2 years after the kidnapping incident, Sarah received news that would change everything. She was being offered the position of Director of Interspecies Education for the entire Galactic Alliance. The opportunity came with a catch. She would have to leave the Academy and her students to establish integration programs across 57 worlds. The decision should have been easy. This was the chance to implement everything she'd learned on a galactic scale, to ensure that no young being would grow up with the prejudices that had fueled the war. But as Sarah sat in her office watching her now senior students mentor newly arrived freshmen in the botanical gardens, leaving felt impossible. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Zacht entered, now a confident young woman whose research had already been published in 3 major xenobiology journals. Behind her came Marcus, whose dual degree in military science and biology had made him one of the most sought-after graduates in the galaxy. "Professor," Zacht began, her antennae displaying the patterns Sarah had learned indicated nervous excitement. "We heard about the directorship offer." "News travels fast," Sarah replied with a slight smile. Marcus leaned against the doorframe. "Are you going to take it?" "I don't know. Leaving here means leaving all of you and this program we've built together." "Actually," Zacht said, exchanging a glance with Marcus, "we wanted to talk to you about that. We have a proposal." Sarah gestured for them to sit. "I'm listening." "Take the position," Marcus said without preamble. "But don't go alone. What do you mean?" Zacht activated a holographic display showing a detailed organizational chart. "We've been working with other senior students across all the integration programs. What if the new directorship wasn't just one person trying to implement change from the top down? What if it was a team of people who've actually lived integration, spreading out to establish programs throughout the galaxy?" Sarah studied the display. It showed a network of academy graduates taking positions as teachers, administrators, and coordinators on dozens of worlds. Each mixed species team would carry the lessons they'd learned to new institutions. "You're talking about a complete restructuring of galactic education," Sarah said slowly. "We're talking about evolution," Marcus replied. "Natural selection in action. The old single-species model failed, it led to war. The integration model succeeds because it creates stronger, more adaptable communities. But the opposition will be enormous. Many worlds still resist integration." Zacht's wing shifted to the pattern Sarah recognized as determination. "Then we show them what they're missing. Professor, you taught us that biological diversity creates resilience. The same principle applies to social systems." Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself coordinating the most ambitious educational initiative in galactic history. Her former students became her colleagues, planning the establishment of integration programs on worlds that had never seen peaceful cooperation between species. The challenges were immense. The Rigel system had banned non-human teachers for decades. The Vega colonies maintained strict species segregation laws. Several former Zephyrian worlds still operated under military education protocols that viewed other species as potential threats. But Sarah's team brought something unprecedented: proof that integration worked. They had data, testimonials, and most importantly, living examples of successful interspecies cooperation. The first test came on Rigel Prime, where Sarah and a mixed team including Zacht, Marcus, and 6 other graduates attempted to establish an integration program. Despite fierce local opposition, the planetary government had agreed to a trial period only under pressure from the Galactic Alliance, and local sentiment remained hostile. "Protesters outside the school again today," reported Kethvar. Now Dr. Kethvar, after completing his advanced degrees in both biochemistry and education. "But enrollment is up 12% from last week." Sarah looked up from her administrative work. They had commandeered an abandoned school building on the outskirts of New Geneva, the planet's capital city. The facility was old and understaffed, but it served their purposes. "Parents are curious," added Dr. Lyra Kelmeran, whose research on aquatic ecosystem management had earned her recognition throughout the Centaurian territories. "They see the success stories from other worlds, and they want those opportunities for their children." The breakthrough came during their first public demonstration. A group of skeptical parents had demanded to see what integration education actually meant. Sarah had organized a practical problem-solving exercise using a simulated environmental crisis. "Your colony is facing contaminated water supplies, failed crops, and potential atmospheric imbalance," Sarah announced to the mixed group of student volunteers and observing parents. "You have 2 hours to develop solutions using only the resources available in this room." The students immediately organized themselves into species-integrated teams, each member contributing their unique knowledge and abilities. Human students provided technical analysis. Altarian students offered chemical processing solutions. Zephyrian students contributed biological adaptation strategies, and others added their specialized knowledge. Remarkable, whispered Dr. Helena Voss, a local scientist who had come to observe skeptically. They're not just sharing information, they're synthesizing completely new approaches. Within the 2-hour limit, the students had developed a comprehensive solution involving bioengineered filtration systems, crop rotation strategies adapted from 4 different agricultural traditions, and atmospheric processing techniques that combined 3 species environmental technologies. This is impossible, protested Councillor Brennan, one of the most vocal opponents of integration. These are just children playing games. Actually, said Marcus, stepping forward with quiet confidence, this is how we solved the Kepler 442b atmospheric crisis last year. The solution we just demonstrated is based on real-world applications that are currently maintaining breathable atmosphere for 3 million beings. The room fell silent. Sarah watched as understanding dawned on the faces of parents and officials. This wasn't theoretical education. It was practical preparation for the challenges their children would actually face. Over the following months, resistance to the program crumbled as results became undeniable. Student performance improved across all metrics. Applications from other worlds poured in. Most importantly, the children themselves became ambassadors for integration, going home each day to share what they'd learned with their families. The success on Rigel Prime opened doors throughout the galaxy. World after world requested integration programs, and Sarah's growing network of graduates was ready to provide them. What had started as a single experimental classroom had become a galactic movement, but the most significant moment came during a video conference with the Galactic Alliance Council. Sarah was presenting her annual report when Councillor Vexhai, the Centaurian representative who had once questioned whether different species could truly cooperate, made an unexpected announcement. Director Chen, this council has reviewed the comprehensive data from integration programs across 57 worlds. The results are unambiguous. Educational outcomes have improved by an average of 43%. Innovation rates have increased by 67%. Most significantly, incidents of interspecies conflict have decreased by 89% in systems with active integration programs. Sarah felt her heart racing as she sensed what was coming. Therefore, Councillor Vexhai continued, the Galactic Alliance formally adopts integration education as the standard model for all member worlds. Furthermore, we are establishing the Chen Institute for Interspecies Education, with permanent funding to expand programs to non-alliance worlds. The conference room erupted in applause, but Sarah barely heard it. Through her office window, she could see Zach leading a group of new students on a tour of the botanical gardens, pointing out plants from dozens of worlds growing together in impossible harmony. Marcus appeared at her door, grinning broadly. Congratulations, Director. You've just revolutionized galactic education. We've revolutionized it, Sarah corrected. This was never about one person or one species. It was about proving that diversity creates strength. That evening, Sarah stood once again in a botanical garden, this one on Rigel Prime, where plants from former enemy worlds now grew side by side. Her original students, now colleagues and leaders in their own right, had gathered to celebrate the Alliance decision. Professor, Zakath said, approaching with a small potted plant whose silver leaves caught the light of 3 moons. I wanted to give you this. It's a cutting from the original memory flower you've kept in your office all these years. Sarah accepted the plant carefully. What memory should this one preserve? Tonight, Zakath replied. The night we proved that former enemies can become the foundation for a better future. As Sarah looked around at her students, no, her colleagues, she realized that her transition from battlefield to classroom had led to something she'd never expected. She hadn't just changed careers, she'd helped change the galaxy. The memory flower would bloom tonight, preserving the moment when an experimental education program became the foundation for lasting peace. But more importantly, it would preserve the knowledge that the future was in good hands, the hands of young beings who had learned that their differences weren't obstacles to overcome, but advantages to celebrate. The war had ended with treaties and political agreements, but peace had been built in classrooms, one student relationship at a time, by teachers who believed that education could triumph over prejudice, and it had. Behind her, scattered across 1,000 worlds, her students continued the work they'd begun together in a simple classroom, building a future where diversity was strength, cooperation was natural, and peace was not just possible but inevitable. The memory flowers would bloom and the galaxy would remember.